what types of things could be an accommodation for an employee?
Well, generally, they fall into a lot of different categories. I mean, one is your workspace, right? If people have physical limitations, back issues, and so on, sometimes it requires different types of desks or seats or things like that. Monitors, if someone has an eyesight problem. A lot of times the accommodations do involve people who need to take a leave. In other words, if you have a disability, you need to take a leave. Sometimes it might be beyond what the company or the law allows in terms of a medical leave. But if they have a disability that's going to require a longer treatment, they're going to come back at a certain deadline. It can't be just extended out forever. That's not necessarily reasonable, but to allow an employee time for a leave to be taken. Now we're seeing with COVID, when individuals who have these vulnerabilities, there are individuals who are, you could say they're uniquely vulnerable, but there's so many across the country who are vulnerable towards, COVID's kind of the roulette disease, right? One person can get it. Oh, no big deal. I got through it. But that's not true for everyone. And hundreds of thousands of people have paid for some of our, being cavalier about this, and especially from the top with the administration that was in place in 2020, and they've paid for it with their lives. So it's important in those instances that, that there are accommodations that are made, such as if an individual can do their work remotely, and we've seen that people can perform their job remotely, and it's not an undue hardship on the company. That's another sort of term of art, undue hardship, if the company can say, we're not going to provide an accommodation because it causes us an undue hardship, and they have to show what that is. But in so many instances where employees can do their job remotely and protect themselves from the worst ravages of COVID, then we contend, and I think it's consistent with the law, that the companies do have the legal obligation to allow that remote work for individuals who are disabled, because it could allow them to do their job and save their lives.
So does the employer have to defer to the medical provider if the medical provider makes a recommendation?
No, not necessarily. Again, the employer has to at least go through the process and engage in that interactive process to determine whether they could provide the requested accommodation. Is there a job available within the company that the employee could do that meets with those specifications? But again, the burden on the employer not to provide that accommodation is to say, this would cause an undue hardship. And when you're dealing with larger companies and so on, let's say it's going to cost the company a little extra money to do that, to provide that monitor, to allow someone to work remotely, whatever it is. Well, the fact that it costs a little more isn't an undue hardship for most corporations or government entities. So it can't be like, well, this is inconvenient. I mean, a lot of times these accommodations are inconvenient for the employer. That's not an excuse not to give it to the employee.